The morning sun cast golden rays across the palace courtyard as Officer Marcus Bennett adjusted his ceremonial uniform. He had been a member of the Royal Guard for 12 years, and every day felt like a privilege. The palace was bustling with preparations for the annual charity gala, an event that brought together diplomats, celebrities, and wealthy donors from around the world. Children from local orphanages were invited to perform, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Marcus stood at his post near the east entrance, watching as guests began to arrive. Limousines pulled up one after another, depositing elegantly dressed adults and their excited children. The palace gardens had been transformed into a wonderland, with balloon arches, face painting stations, and a small carnival set up specifically for the young guests. It was meant to be a day of joy and celebration. Among the arriving guests was a man named Richard Pemberton, a wealthy businessman known for his generous donations to children's charities. He stepped out of a black Mercedes, followed by a young girl who appeared to be around 9 years old. She had dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail and wore a beautiful blue dress that seemed too formal for a child. Her name was Emma, though Marcus wouldn't learn that until later. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't the expensive car or the man's tailored suit. It was the girl's face. While other children ran excitedly toward the carnival games, laughing and pulling their parents along, this girl walked slowly behind the man, her eyes downcast. There was something in her posture, a stiffness that seemed unnatural for a child at what should have been a magical event. Marcus had been trained to notice details. In his years of service, he had learned to read body language, to spot tension in a crowd, to identify when something felt wrong even if he couldn't immediately explain why. As the man and girl passed through the security checkpoint, Marcus watched them carefully. The man placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, and she flinched almost imperceptibly. It was so subtle that most people would have missed it entirely. The girl's eyes briefly met Marcus's, and in that fraction of a second he saw something that made his chest tighten. Fear. Raw, genuine fear in the eyes of a child who should have been enjoying a fairy tale day at the palace. Then, the moment passed and she looked away, following the man into the palace grounds. Marcus tried to shake off the feeling. Perhaps he was overthinking it. Maybe the girl was just shy or uncomfortable in formal settings. Children often felt nervous at big events. But something nagged at him, a whisper of intuition that refused to be silenced. He had 2 daughters of his own, aged 7 and 11, and he knew how children typically behaved. This was different. As his shift continued, Marcus found his attention repeatedly drawn to where the man and girl had gone. He could see them in the distance, the man speaking with other wealthy donors, champagne glass in hand while the girl sat alone at a nearby table. She wasn't playing with other children. She wasn't eating the treats laid out on colorful platters. She simply sat, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. During a brief rotation, Marcus moved to a different post that gave him a better view of the event space. The charity auction was about to begin, and the master of ceremonies was encouraging everyone to take their seats. Children were being ushered to a special viewing area where they could watch the proceedings while enjoying ice cream and entertainment from a magician. The girl stood to follow the other children, but the man grabbed her wrist. From Marcus's position, he couldn't hear what was said, but he saw the man lean down and speak directly into the girl's ear. The girl's entire body went rigid. She nodded, once quickly, and then walked stiffly toward the children's area, her earlier fear now even more apparent to Marcus's trained eye. Something was very wrong. Marcus's instincts screamed at him, but he was bound by protocol. He couldn't simply approach a guest and demand to know why a child seemed frightened. These were wealthy, influential people. Making an accusation without evidence could end his career and cause an international incident. Yet every fiber of his being told him that this child needed help. The magician began his performance and children gathered around, their faces lit with wonder as he performed tricks and illusions. The girl sat at the back of the group, apart from the others. Marcus noticed she kept glancing back toward where the man sat with the other adults, as if checking to make sure she was being watched. Then something happened that would change everything. The magician called for a volunteer, and several children's hands shot into the air, eager to be part of the show. The girl's hand also rose, slowly, hesitantly. The magician, seeing her sitting alone, chose her with a warm smile. She walked forward, and for the first time that day, Marcus saw something other than fear in her expression. There was a flicker of determination. The magic trick was simple. The magician would make a coin disappear and reappear. He handed the coin to the girl and asked her to hold it tightly while he waved his wand and said the magic words. But instead of playing along with the trick, the girl did something unexpected. She held the coin up to the light, examining it closely, then looked directly at where Marcus stood in the distance. What happened next took only seconds but felt like an eternity. The girl began to perform sign language. Her movements were quick and deliberate, hidden from most of the audience by her position but clearly visible to Marcus, who had learned basic sign language years ago when his younger daughter's best friend was deaf. The message was simple but devastating. "Help me. Not safe. Please." Marcus felt his blood run cold. His hand instinctively moved to the radio on his belt, but he forced himself to remain calm. He needed to be smart about this. If the man saw him, react if he suspected anything, the girl could be in immediate danger. The magician continued his show, oblivious to what had just occurred, and the girl returned to her seat, her face once again a mask of careful neutrality. But she had sent her message, and Marcus had received it. Now the question was what to do. Next, how to help this child without putting her in greater danger. His mind raced through possibilities and protocols as he watched the man in the distance, laughing and socializing, completely unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. Marcus's mind worked quickly, sorting through years of training and protocol. He couldn't simply rush over and grab the girl. That would alert the man and potentially escalate a dangerous situation. He needed to be strategic, methodical, and most importantly, he needed to protect the child while gathering information. He pressed the button on his radio, speaking quietly into his shoulder mic. Bennett to command. Need to speak with Captain Reynolds. Code Yellow. Guest welfare concern. East Garden area. Code Yellow meant a potential problem that required discreet attention without alarming the general public or causing a scene. Within 3 minutes, Captain Sarah Reynolds appeared at his side, her expression professional but concerned. She was a veteran of the Royal Guard with 20 years of experience and had worked cases involving threatened dignitaries, security breaches, and even a kidnapping attempt 5 years prior. Marcus trusted her judgment completely. "What do we have?" she asked quietly, her eyes scanning the crowd. Marcus kept his voice low, his gaze never leaving the girl. Young female, approximately 9 years old, blue dress, seated in the children's area. Came with Richard Pemberton. She just used sign language to ask for help. Said she's not safe. Reynolds's expression remained neutral, but Marcus saw her jaw tighten slightly. "You're certain about the sign language? No chance of misinterpretation?" "Positive. My daughter's friend is deaf. I know enough to be sure of what I saw." Marcus paused. "Sarah, I've been watching her since they arrived. The body language, the fear in her eyes, the way she flinches when he touches her. Something is seriously wrong." Reynolds nodded slowly, her mind already formulating a plan. "Pemberton is a major donor. We need to be absolutely certain before we act, but we also can't ignore a direct plea for help from a child. Stay at your post. I'm going to make some inquiries and get child services on standby. Do not lose sight of that girl." As Reynolds walked away, speaking quietly into her own radio, Marcus maintained his position. He watched as the magic show concluded and children dispersed to various activities. The girl remained seated, isolated from the other children who had already formed little groups and friendships. She looked small and alone despite being surrounded by dozens of people. Across the garden, Richard Pemberton was deep in conversation with a diplomat and 2 other businessmen. He was animated, gesturing with his hands, clearly enjoying himself. Every few minutes, his eyes would sweep toward where the girl sat, a quick check to ensure she hadn't moved. There was something possessive about those glances that made Marcus's skin crawl. 10 minutes later, Reynolds returned with 2 additional officers in plain clothes. They were members of the palace's investigative unit, trained to handle delicate situations. With them was Dr. Patricia Holmes, a child psychologist who consulted with the palace on security matters involving children. "Here's what we know," Reynolds said quietly. gathering the team behind a decorative pillar where they could speak without being overheard. I ran Pemberton's information. He's a known philanthropist, never been married, no children listed on any of his documentation. The girl is not his daughter. Palace security has no record of her name or relationship to him in the guest registry. He simply listed +1 guest when he RSVP'd. Marcus felt his stomach drop. She's not his daughter. No identification, no emergency contact information, nothing, which is already a red flag. Reynolds looked at Dr. Holmes. Patricia, we need to make contact with the child without alerting Pemberton. Can you approach her naturally? Dr. Holmes nodded. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that children naturally responded to. I'll go as part of the children's welfare team. We have volunteers circulating to make sure all the young guests are comfortable and having fun. It won't seem unusual. They watched as Dr. Holmes made her way toward the children's area, stopping to speak with several children along the way, asking if they were enjoying themselves, if they needed anything. It looked completely natural, like exactly what she was supposed to be doing. When she reached the girl, she knelt down to be at eye level and began speaking. From his position, Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw the girl's initial wariness slowly give way to something else. The child's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded several times in response to whatever Dr. Holmes was asking. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes. Dr. Holmes pulled out a small pad of paper and a colorful pen, the kind with a fluffy topper that children loved. She offered it to the girl, who took it with shaking hands and began to write something down. When she finished, she handed the paper back to Dr. Holmes, who read it, her professional composure slipping for just a moment as her eyes widened. Dr. Holmes patted the girl's hand gently, said something that made the child nod again, and then stood up and walked back toward the team, taking a deliberately casual route so as not to draw attention. When she reached them, her face was grave. Her name is Emma Cartwright. She's been missing from Manchester for 6 months. Her mother reported her disappearance to the police, but the case went cold after a few weeks with no leads. Dr. Holmes's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she showed them the note. She wrote that Pemberton took her from a park near her home. She's been with him since then, moved between different properties. He told her that if she tried to escape or tell anyone, he would hurt her mother and her little brother. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. This man had abducted a child, held her captive for 6 months, and brought her to a palace event as if she were simply an accessory to his philanthropic image. There's more, Dr. Holmes continued, her voice dropping even lower. She said there are other children. Not here, but at other locations. She's seen them, heard them. She doesn't know where exactly, but she knows they exist. Reynolds' expression hardened into something cold and determined. We need to act now, but we need to be smart. If we simply arrest him here, we might never find the other children. We need him to lead us to them, or we need to get enough information from Emma to locate them first. She turned to Marcus. How much longer until his scheduled departure? Marcus checked the event itinerary on his tablet. The main gala goes for another 3 hours. Most guests typically stay for the full duration, especially major donors like Pemberton. He's scheduled to give a speech in about 40 minutes. That gives us time. Reynolds was already formulating a plan. I'm calling in the authorities. We need police detectives who specialize in child abduction and trafficking. But in the meantime, we need to separate Emma from Pemberton without alerting him to what's happening. One of the plainclothes officers, Detective James Morrison, spoke up. We could stage a minor medical incident. Say the child felt unwell, needed to be taken to the Palace Medical Facility for evaluation. Standard procedure. Nothing that would raise immediate alarm. Dr. Holmes nodded. I can support that. Children get overwhelmed at events like this all the time. Overstimulation, too much sugar, anxiety. It would seem completely normal. Reynolds made the decision. Do it. Take her to the secure medical wing. James, you and Officer Chen escort them. Full security protocol. Marcus, you stay here and keep eyes on Pemberton. I want to know if he shows any sign of suspicion or attempts to leave early. I'm coordinating with Metropolitan Police now. The plan was set in motion. Dr. Holmes returned to Emma, and within minutes there was a small commotion in the children's area. Dr. Holmes was helping Emma to her feet, speaking to nearby volunteers about the child feeling dizzy and needing to rest. It looked entirely believable because Emma, upon learning she was about to be taken to safety, had actually become emotional and lightheaded with relief. From across the garden, Pemberton noticed the activity. Marcus watched as the man's expression changed, his jovial mask slipping for just a moment to reveal something darker underneath. Pemberton excused himself from his conversation and began walking toward the children's area. Marcus's hand moved to his radio. This was the critical moment. Everything depended on how Pemberton reacted and whether Emma could make it to safety before he realized what was really happening. In the hallway, Captain Reynolds was waiting. "Hell of a day," she said simply. Marcus nodded. "Think they'll find the others?" "If they're there, we'll get them out." Reynolds paused. "You did good work today, Bennett. Your instincts saved that girl's life." But Marcus was thinking about the other children, hoping they would be found, hoping this nightmare was finally ending. The tactical team assembled within 40 minutes, a remarkable feat considering the coordination required. Marcus had been relieved of his regular duties to assist with the operation as a witness and because of his connection to Emma. He sat in an operations van parked 2 miles from the target property, watching multiple screens showing drone footage and body camera feeds from the approaching officers. Detective Chen was there too, her expression tense as she monitored communications. "Team Alpha is approaching from the south," she narrated quietly. "Team Bravo covering the north exit. We have aerial support tracking any vehicles that might try to leave the property." The property Emma had identified sat at the end of a long, winding road surrounded by dense woodland. It was isolated, private, exactly the kind of place someone could operate without drawing attention from neighbors. The main house was a sprawling Georgian-style building that had clearly once been a grand country estate, but now looked slightly neglected. Its gardens overgrown and several windows dark even though dusk was falling. The red barn Emma had mentioned stood behind the house, its paint faded and peeling. Smoke rose from one of the house's chimneys, indicating someone was definitely inside. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures of multiple people on the second floor, consistent with Emma's description of where the other children were kept. "All teams in position," came the voice over the radio. "Awaiting green light," Detective Chen gave the command. "Execute. Go, go, go." Marcus watched the screens as officers moved swiftly toward the house. The front door was breached within seconds and tactical teams poured inside, their movements efficient and coordinated. Shouts of "Police! Nobody move!" echoed through the communication system. On the second floor, officers found exactly what Emma had described. 3 locked rooms, each containing a young girl. The youngest appeared to be about 7 years old, the oldest perhaps 12. They were terrified, huddled in corners as officers entered, having learned through bitter experience that adults represented danger. Marcus's chest tightened watching the footage as, trained child welfare specialists who had accompanied, the raid immediately moved forward, speaking gently to the frightened children, wrapping them in blankets, assuring them they were safe now. The girls were crying, some asking for their parents, others simply staring in shock as if unable to process what was happening. In another room on the ground floor, officers found a woman in her 50s. She claimed to be the housekeeper, but records would later reveal she was Pemberton's sister, complicit in the entire operation. She was arrested without incident, her face showing no remorse, only irritation at the inconvenience. 3 victims recovered, came the report through the radio. All alive, mobile, responding. Medical team moving in for immediate evaluation. Detective Chen let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. "Thank God," she murmured. But the operation wasn't over. In the basement of the property, investigators discovered something even more disturbing. A room that had been converted into a makeshift studio, with cameras, lighting equipment, and a computer setup. The hard drives would need to be analyzed, but the implication was clear. This wasn't just about abduction. It was about exploitation, about creating and distributing material that Marcus couldn't even bear to think about. A financial records room was found as well, containing documents that suggested this operation was far larger than anyone had initially imagined. There were addresses of other properties, both in the UK and internationally. There were encrypted lists that appeared to be client databases. There were financial transactions running into millions of pounds. "This is bigger than we thought," Detective Chen said, her voice grim. "This isn't just Pemberton. This is an organized network." Back at the Palace Medical Wing, Emma was still with her mother via video call when news of the successful raid came through. Dr. Holmes quietly informed them that 3 other girls had been found and rescued. Emma began crying again, but this time with relief. She had been so afraid that her information wouldn't be enough, that she had doomed the other children by escaping first. "You saved them," her mother said through the screen, tears streaming down her face. "My brave, brave girl. You saved them." The 3 girls rescued from the property were transported to a specialized children's hospital in London, where they would receive medical care and begin the long process of trauma recovery. Their identities were quickly established through missing persons databases. One had been missing from Scotland for 8 months. Another had vanished from a small town in Wales nearly a year ago. The youngest had been taken from a shopping center in Birmingham just 3 months earlier. Each girl's family was notified, and the scenes of reunion that followed over the next 24 hours were both heartbreaking and healing. Parents who had been living in a nightmare of not knowing now had their children back. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, but at least the nightmare of captivity was over. Marcus returned to his post at the palace the next morning. Though the gala had been concluded early the previous day, once word of the arrest had spread among security personnel. The media had gotten wind of the story, and news vans were camped outside the palace gates, though official statements were being carefully managed to protect the identities of the children involved. Captain Reynolds called Marcus into her office mid-morning. When he arrived, he found not just Reynolds but also the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and a representative from the Home Office. "Officer Bennett," the Commissioner said, standing to shake his hand. "Your actions yesterday saved multiple lives. The attention to detail, the quick thinking, the way you handled an incredibly sensitive situation, all of it was exemplary." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did my job, sir. Emma is the real hero here. She was the one who was brave enough to ask for help." "You're both heroes," Reynolds said firmly. "But Marcus, there's something you need to know. The investigation into Pemberton's network has uncovered something extensive. We're talking about multiple properties across 3 countries, dozens of potential victims, and a client list that includes some very prominent individuals. This is going to be a long, complex investigation." The Home Office representative spoke up. "We'd like you to be part of the task force. Your understanding of how this case began, your rapport with Emma, who has indicated she's willing to provide testimony thanks to the trust she places in you, these things make you valuable to the ongoing investigation." Marcus thought about his family, his 2 daughters at home. He thought about Emma's face when she had signed those desperate words asking for help. He thought about the 3 girls found in that house, and about all the others who might still be out there waiting to be rescued. "I'll do whatever I can to help," he said. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded in ways that shocked even seasoned detectives. The hard drives from the property contained evidence of dozens of children who had passed through Pemberton's network over the years. Some had been returned to their families after exploitation, threatened into silence. Others had simply vanished, their fates unknown but feared. The financial records led to arrests across Europe and North America. The clients that Pemberton had served included businessmen, politicians, and even 2 members of minor nobility. The scandal rocked several countries as the full scope of the network was revealed. Emma and the 3 other girls became the key witnesses in what would eventually be one of the largest child exploitation prosecutions in British history. They were given new identities to protect them from media attention and any potential retaliation. Specialized therapists worked with them, helping them process their trauma and prepare for the legal proceedings ahead. Marcus attended several of Emma's therapy sessions at her request and with her mother's permission. She said his presence made her feel safe, reminded her that there were good adults who protected children. He brought his own daughters to meet her once. A carefully supervised meeting where 4 young girls played in a park under watchful eyes, finding common ground in dolls and laughter, proving that healing was possible. The investigation uncovered 17 more children who were found alive in various locations around the world. Each recovery was celebrated, though the joy was always tempered by the knowledge of what these children had endured. 8 other children who had passed through the network were identified through photographs but remained missing. Their families left in the agonizing limbo of not knowing. Pemberton himself refused to cooperate with investigators, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. His lawyers crafted elaborate defenses, trying to claim everything was planted, that he was being framed. But the testimony of the children, supported by forensic evidence, financial records, and digital data, built an unassailable case. 6 months after that fateful day at the Palace Gala, Marcus stood in a courtroom watching as Pemberton was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 30 years. The judge's words were scathing, describing him as a predator who had preyed upon the most vulnerable members of society with calculation and cruelty. Emma was there in the courtroom, sitting between her mother and a victim advocate. When the sentence was read, she reached for her mother's hand and squeezed it. She didn't smile. The weight of what she had experienced was still too heavy for that, but there was something in her eyes that looked like peace. The months following the trial brought both closure and new challenges for everyone involved. Marcus found himself permanently assigned to a specialized unit within the Royal Guard that focused on child protection during palace events. The position had been created specifically in response to what had happened with Emma, a recognition that traditional security protocols needed to expand beyond protecting dignitaries from physical threats. Emma's recovery was progressing, though it was far from a straight path. Her mother, Jennifer Cartwright, had relocated them to a new town where they could start fresh, away from the media attention and the memories of that terrible day when Emma had vanished from the park. Emma was in school again, though she struggled with anxiety and had nightmares that woke her screaming several nights a week. Jennifer called Marcus one evening in late autumn, her voice tired but grateful. "She asks about you often," Jennifer said. "Wants to know if you've helped any other children. I think knowing that something good came from what she went through helps her cope with the memories. How is she doing in school?" Marcus asked, genuinely concerned. "Better than expected, honestly. She's made a few friends, though she's still cautious around adults. Her therapist says that's completely normal. Trust takes time to rebuild." Jennifer paused. "She wants to write you a letter. Would that be all right?" "Of course," Marcus replied. "Tell her I'd love to hear from her." The letter arrived a week later, written in careful handwriting on paper decorated with stars and rainbows. Emma wrote about her new school, about her little brother who had started asking questions about where she had been, about the cat they had adopted from a shelter. She wrote about the nightmares, too, with a frankness that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. At the end, she wrote something that Marcus would keep with him always. "You saw me when I was invisible. You listened when I couldn't speak with words. Thank you for not looking away. Thank you for caring when nobody else noticed. I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people who need it." Marcus showed the letter to his wife, Amanda, that evening. She read it with tears in her eyes. "That little girl has been through hell and she wants to help others. That's remarkable." "It is," Marcus agreed. "It makes me think about how many other children are out there right now, trying to signal for help in whatever way they can. How many are we missing?" The question haunted him. The investigation into Pemberton's network had revealed that dozens of children had been exploited over the years. But how many cases never came to light? How many children suffered in silence because no one was paying attention? He began researching child abduction and exploitation statistics, studying the methods predators used, learning about the warning signs that often went unnoticed. He discovered that in many cases, abducted children had been in public places, sometimes even crowded ones, but no one had recognized that anything was wrong. Predators relied on people's tendency to mind their own business, to assume that a child with an adult must be where they belong. Marcus developed a training program for the Royal Guard and Palace security staff, teaching them how to recognize subtle signs of distress in children, how to spot relationships that didn't seem quite right, and how to intervene appropriately without escalating dangerous situations. The program was so effective that it began to be adopted by other security organizations and even schools throughout the country. Meanwhile, the other 3 girls who had been rescued from the countryside property were also on their healing journeys. Lily, the youngest at 7, had been returned to her parents in Birmingham. Sophie, aged 10, was back with her family in Wales, and Charlotte, 12, had reunited with her family in Scotland. Each family was dealing with their own version of the trauma, trying to help their daughters recover while processing their own guilt and grief over what had happened. A support group was formed for the families, allowing them to connect with others who understood what they were going through. Jennifer became one of the leading voices in the group, using her experience with Emma's recovery to help guide other parents. She was determined that something positive would come from the nightmare they had all endured. 1 year after Emma's rescue, the families organized a private gathering at a community center in London. All 4 girls were there with their families, along with Marcus, Captain Reynolds, Dr. Holmes, and Detective Chen. It was meant to be a celebration of survival, a marking of how far they had all come. The event was simple. There was food, music, and activities for the children, but the most powerful moment came when Emma stood up in front of the small group and began to speak. Her mother had helped her prepare what she wanted to say, but the words were entirely her own. "A year ago I was scared all the time," Emma said, her voice small but steady. "I thought nobody would ever find me. I thought I would be trapped forever. But then I saw Officer Marcus and something inside me said to try one more time to ask for help. And he saw me. He really saw me." She looked at Marcus, who was standing at the back of the room, and smiled. "Because of him, I'm here. Because of him, Lily and Sophie and Charlotte are here with their families too. Because of him, a lot of bad people can't hurt kids anymore." Emma turned to address the other girls. "I know we all have bad dreams sometimes. I know we all get scared, but we're here. We survived, and we're going to be okay." Lily, Sophie, and Charlotte nodded, their faces reflecting the same mixture of pain and resilience that Emma's showed. They were forever changed by what they had experienced, but they were not broken. They were survivors, and they were finding their way back to life. After the gathering, Marcus spoke privately with each of the girls, asking how they were doing and listening as they shared their struggles and victories. Lily was having trouble sleeping, but had started painting as a way to express feelings she couldn't put into words. Sophie was back to playing football and had even rejoined her team, finding comfort in the routine and physical activity. Charlotte, the oldest, was considering becoming a therapist when she grew up so she could help other trauma survivors. As Marcus drove home that evening, he thought about the ripple effects of that one moment when Emma had signaled for help. 4 girls were safe, 17 others had been found and rescued. A criminal network had been dismantled. Families had been reunited, and now these children were determined to turn their pain into purpose, to help others avoid the same fate they had suffered. But Marcus also knew the fight was far from over. The trial had revealed that Pemberton's network, while significant, was just one part of a much larger problem. Child exploitation was happening every day in every country, often hidden in plain sight. The demand for such horrific material continued to drive the supply, creating a market that destroyed innocent lives. He thought about Emma's words in her letter, about wanting to help people when she grew up. She was already helping by being brave enough to share her story in therapy, by cooperating with investigators, by standing in that courtroom and testifying about what had happened to her. She was 11 years old and had already done more to fight this evil than most adults ever would. Marcus's phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. It was Captain Reynolds. "We've got a situation," she said without preamble. "Another high-profile event next week. The Ambassador's Gala. I need you there specifically because of your training and what you spot that others miss." "I'll be there," Marcus said without hesitation. "Good. And Marcus, there's something else. The Home Office wants to expand your training program nationally. They want you to train police officers, social workers, teachers, anyone who works with children regularly. They're calling it the Emma Protocol." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. "Emma knows about this?" "Her mother does. She thinks Emma will be proud, knowing that what she went through is helping protect other children." Reynolds paused. "You changed that girl's life, Marcus. Now you have the chance to potentially save countless others." As Marcus entered his house, his 2 daughters ran to greet him, excited to tell him about their day at school. He hugged them tightly, grateful for their safety, grateful for the ordinary problems of homework and friend drama that filled their lives. They would never fully understand why their father sometimes got quiet and sad, why he checked on them multiple times each night, why he was so careful about where they went and who they were with. But he would keep them safe, and he would keep training others to see what he had learned to see, to notice what Emma had been brave enough to show him. Because somewhere out there right now another child was waiting for someone to notice, someone to care, someone to act. Emma had taught him that every child deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be protected. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, and a mission he would never stop pursuing. 2 years after Emma's rescue, The Emma Protocol had been implemented across the United Kingdom and was beginning to gain international attention. Marcus found himself traveling to different cities, training thousands of professionals on how to recognize signs of child exploitation and distress. Each session began the same way with Emma's story, though her name was changed to protect her privacy. He would describe that moment at the Palace Gala, when a frightened girl had used sign language to ask for help, and how paying attention to that silent plea had saved multiple lives. The training sessions were intense and emotional. Marcus taught participants to recognize behavioral indicators like a child who seemed overly compliant or fearful around a particular adult, who flinched from touch, who seemed disconnected or withdrawn in situations where other children were excited. He taught them about grooming behaviors, about how predators often presented themselves as upstanding citizens, about how trafficking could happen anywhere, not just in stereotypical scenarios. Many participants came to him after the sessions with their own stories. A teacher who had noticed something off about a student's home situation, but hadn't known what to do. A store clerk who had seen a child who seemed frightened, but assumed it wasn't their place to intervene. A doctor who had missed signs that were now obvious in hindsight. The training gave them tools and confidence to act when they saw something concerning. Emma herself had grown stronger over those 2 years. She was now 13, entering the difficult teenage years with challenges that were compounded by her trauma history. But she was also thriving in ways her therapist described as remarkable. She had started a blog with her mother's permission, writing about her recovery journey in vague terms that protected her identity but offered hope to other survivors. She received messages from children and adults around the world who had experienced similar traumas, telling her that her words helped them feel less alone. On the 2nd anniversary of her rescue, Emma asked if she could attend one of Marcus's training sessions. Jennifer was hesitant, worried it might be too triggering, but Emma's therapist thought it might be empowering for her to see the impact her courage had created. The session was at a conference center in Manchester, with about 200 attendees including police officers, social workers, teachers, and healthcare professionals. Marcus had prepared them ahead of time, explaining that a survivor would be present and asking them to be respectful of her privacy and emotional well-being. Emma sat in the front row with her mother, listening as Marcus described the case that had started everything. When he reached the part about the girl using sign language, Emma raised her hand. Marcus paused, surprised, and nodded to her. "Can I say something?" Emma asked, her voice carrying through the microphone that was quickly brought to her. "Of course," Marcus said gently. Emma stood, her hands trembling slightly but her voice clear. "I'm the girl from that story. My real name is Emma, and I was taken from a park near my home when I was 9 years old. I spent 6 months being moved between different places, being told that if I tried to escape or ask for help, my family would be hurt." The room was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. That day at the palace, I had tried to ask for help so many times before and nobody noticed. Or maybe they noticed but didn't want to get involved. I don't know. But Officer Marcus, he noticed. He saw that I was scared, and he did something about it. Emma's voice wavered, but she continued. "Because of him, I'm here. 3 other girls are with their families, and so many others were found and rescued." She looked around the room at the faces staring at her with a mixture of awe and compassion. "You're all here learning how to see what he saw. That matters so much. Because right now, somewhere, there's another kid like me who is waiting for someone to notice, someone to care, someone to do something." Emma sat back down and the room erupted in applause. Many attendees were crying openly, moved by her bravery and her message. Jennifer wrapped her arm around her daughter, whispering something in her ear that made Emma smile. After the session ended, Emma was approached by dozens of people who wanted to thank her for her courage, to tell her how inspiring she was, to promise they would never look away if they saw a child in need. Emma handled it with grace, though Marcus could see the exhaustion beginning to show on her face. He gently intervened, suggesting she and Jennifer take a break. In a quiet room away from the crowd, Emma looked at Marcus with tired but satisfied eyes. "Did I do okay?" she asked. "You were incredible," Marcus told her honestly. "What you did today, sharing your story like that, it's going to stay with everyone in that room. They'll remember you when they're out in the world, and they'll be watching for children who need help." "Good," Emma said softly. "I don't want what happened to me to be for nothing. If my story can save even one other kid, then maybe it means something." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Your story already means something, sweetheart. You survived. You healed. You're helping others. That's everything. As the Emma protocol continued to expand, statistical evidence began to show its effectiveness. In the first year after implementation, there was a 30% increase in reported suspicions of child exploitation that led to investigations. While some worried this might be false alarms, investigators found that the majority of reports were legitimate concerns that warranted follow-up. Children were being identified and helped earlier, before situations escalated to severe abuse or long-term captivity. Schools reported that teachers trained in the protocol were better able to identify students in crisis and connect them with appropriate resources. Medical professionals caught signs of abuse they might have previously missed. Even ordinary citizens were more willing to report concerning situations they witnessed, knowing they had been given tools to recognize genuine distress. The 3 other girls rescued alongside Emma were also doing well. Lily, now 9, had become an advocate for art therapy and regularly shared her paintings at survivor support groups. Sophie, 12, had written a children's book about a brave rabbit who escaped from a dark forest, a metaphor for her own experience that helped younger children understand trauma recovery. Charlotte, 14, had started mentoring newly rescued children, using her experience to help them navigate the difficult early days of freedom. The 4 girls stayed in touch, forming a bond that only those who had shared such a specific trauma could understand. They video chatted regularly, supported each other through difficult days, and celebrated victories together. They had created their own small community of survivors who understood each other in ways no one else could. Marcus watched their progress with pride and hope. But he also stayed vigilant, knowing that for every child saved, there were others still in danger. The investigation into Pemberton's network had revealed the shocking scope of child exploitation, but it had also shown how much more work remained to be done. During one training session in London, a police detective approached Marcus during a break. "I wanted to tell you about a case we just closed," the detective said. A convenience store clerk noticed a teenage girl who came in regularly with an older man. The girl always seemed nervous, never spoke, never made eye contact. The clerk had attended your training 3 months ago. She remembered the signs you talked about and called our tip line. Marcus listened intently as the detective continued. We investigated and found the girl had been trafficked from another country, was being held in a flat nearby, forced to work in illicit massage parlors. Because of that clerk's call, we were able to rescue her and arrest 3 people involved in the trafficking ring. The girl is now safe and receiving care. That's exactly what the protocol is meant to do, Marcus said, feeling the familiar mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that another child was safe, sorrow that such interventions were necessary. "The clerk wanted me to thank you," the detective added. "She said before the training she might have noticed something was off but wouldn't have known what to do, or if it was appropriate to get involved. The training gave her permission to trust her instincts and act on them." These stories became increasingly common as the Emma protocol spread. A taxi driver noticed a young passenger who seemed afraid of the adult with her and called police, leading to the rescue of a runaway who had been picked up by a predator. A hotel worker recognized signs of trafficking in guests and reported it, resulting in a bust of a major exploitation ring. A neighbor paid attention to a child who seemed isolated and neglected, and that call led to intervention that likely saved the child's life. Each success reinforced the core message of the protocol. Everyone has a role to play in protecting children. It's not just the responsibility of police or social services. Every person who interacts with children, whether professionally or in passing, has the power to be the one who notices, the one who cares, the one who acts. Emma's therapist noted that being part of this larger movement was helping Emma process her trauma in a healthy way. Instead of seeing herself only as a victim, she saw herself as a catalyst for change, as someone whose suffering had meaning because it was preventing others from experiencing the same fate. It didn't erase what had happened to her, but it gave her a sense of purpose that aided her healing. On Emma's 14th birthday, Marcus and his family were invited to her party, a small gathering of close friends and family. As they sang happy birthday and Emma blew out the candles, Marcus thought about how close they had come to never having this moment. If he had ignored his instincts that day, if he had dismissed the fear in her eyes as mere shyness, Emma might still be in captivity or worse. But he had paid attention. He had acted. And because of that, this remarkable girl was here, surrounded by love, building a life, healing and growing stronger every day. 5 years after Emma's rescue, the impact of that single moment at the Palace Gala had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The Emma Protocol was now taught in 43 countries, translated into 26 languages, and had directly contributed to the rescue of over 300 children worldwide. International law enforcement agencies had adopted it as standard training, and several universities had incorporated it into their social work and education programs. Marcus had been promoted to senior inspector within the Royal Guard's Child Protection Division, a department that had grown from his initial one-person assignment to a team of 15 specialists. He still conducted training sessions, but now he also oversaw the development of new protection strategies and consulted on high-profile cases involving children. Emma was now 18 years old, preparing to enter university to study psychology with a focus on trauma recovery. She had spent the past year speaking at conferences and events, sharing her story publicly now that she was an adult and could make that choice for herself. Her face had appeared in newspapers and on television. No longer the frightened 9-year-old from the palace, but a confident young woman determined to make a difference. She had written a book about her experience in recovery, titled Seeing a Survivor's Journey from Silence to Voice. The book became an international bestseller, with proceeds going to organizations that supported child abuse survivors. In it, she wrote in detail about the 6 months of captivity, the moment she decided to signal for help one last time, and the long road of healing that followed. The book was both heartbreaking and hopeful, a testament to human resilience. Jennifer Cartwright had become a full-time advocate as well, working with lawmakers to strengthen child protection laws and ensure better resources for survivors. She and Marcus had formed a foundation called Notice, CARE Act dedicated to training people in child protection and providing support, services for rescued children and their families. The 3 other girls, who had been rescued that day, had also grown into remarkable young women. Lily, now 14, was an accomplished artist whose work depicting her journey from darkness to light had been exhibited in galleries. Sophie, 17, was training to become a professional footballer and spoke openly about how sports had helped her heal. Charlotte, 19, was in her first year of university studying to become a child psychologist, determined to help others navigate the trauma she had once faced. The 4 of them remained close, meeting several times a year and maintaining constant contact through messages and calls. They had formed a bond forged in shared survival, and they supported each other through the challenges that still sometimes arose. Trauma didn't disappear completely. They all still had difficult days, but they had learned to manage it and had built lives full of purpose and hope. On the 5th anniversary of the rescue, a special ceremony was held at the palace. It was a private event, attended by the 4 girls and their families. Marcus and his family, Captain Reynolds, who had since retired, Dr. Holmes, Detective Chen, and several others who had been involved in the case and subsequent investigation. The Queen herself made a brief appearance, something that was almost unprecedented for such a personal gathering. She spoke briefly, her words carefully chosen and deeply felt. What happened 5 years ago in these very gardens was a tragedy that should never have occurred. But it also demonstrated the very best of human courage and compassion. A child's bravery in asking for help, an officer's vigilance in noticing what others missed, a team's dedication in ensuring justice was served, and survivors' determination to transform pain into purpose. The Queen presented Marcus with a commendation for exceptional service, though he insisted the real heroes were Emma and the other girls. She then turned to Emma, Sophie, Lily, and Charlotte, speaking to each of them personally. You have taken the worst that life could throw at you and emerged as advocates, healers, and inspirations. Your strength honors all survivors, and your work is saving lives. The nation is proud of you. After the ceremony, the group gathered in the same garden where Emma had first signaled for help. The area looked different now. A small memorial had been installed, a sculpture of 4 birds taking flight representing the 4 girls who had been freed. A plaque read simply, "In recognition of courage, vigilance, and the power of paying attention, may we always see those who need to be seen." Emma stood before the memorial with Marcus beside her. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day? she asked quietly. Marcus had thought about it many times over the years. I was there, he said simply. That's what matters. But what if you hadn't been? What if it had been a different guard, someone who didn't notice or didn't care enough to act? Emma's voice held no accusation, only curiosity about an alternate reality they would never know. Then hopefully the training we've done means next time, someone else will notice. That's why this work is so important. We can't rely on luck or chance. We need people to be educated and empowered to act. Marcus looked at the memorial. You helped create that, Emma. Your courage that day started a ripple effect that's still spreading. Emma nodded slowly. I used to have nightmares about the what-ifs. What if you hadn't seen me? What if I had been too scared to try asking for help? What if Pemberton had noticed and stopped me? She took a deep breath. But my therapist helped me realize that dwelling on what might have happened doesn't help. What matters is what did happen. I asked, you answered. We saved each other in different ways, it was true. Marcus had saved Emma's life, but in many ways she had saved his as well. Before that day, he had been a competent guard doing his job well, but without deeper purpose. Emma had shown him that true protection meant more than watching for physical threats. It meant seeing people's humanity, especially the vulnerable, and being willing to act on their behalf even when it was uncomfortable or complicated. His daughters, now 17 and 14, had grown up knowing Emma and the other girls as extended family. They understood that their father's work was about more than just a job. They had learned from Emma's example that surviving hardship didn't define a person. It was what you did afterward that mattered. Both girls had expressed interest in careers helping others, inspired by the stories they had grown up hearing. As the sun began to set over the palace gardens, casting golden light across the memorial, the survivors and their families shared a meal together. It was a celebration of life, of healing, of the families that had been reunited and the new family they had all become through shared experience. Lily showed everyone her latest painting, a vibrant piece full of color and light. Sophie talked excitedly about an upcoming tournament. Charlotte discussed her studies and the survivor group she had started at her university. Emma shared news about university admission and her excitement about studying psychology. These were ordinary conversations about ordinary lives, and that ordinariness was extraordinary. 5 years ago, none of this had seemed possible. These girls had been trapped in darkness, their futures stolen, their voices silenced. Now they were thriving, planning futures, pursuing dreams. They still carried scars, both visible and invisible, but they had not let those scars define them. Later, as guests were leaving, Emma pulled Marcus aside one more time. I want you to know something, she said seriously. When I was in captivity, I used to imagine what freedom would feel like. I thought it would be this instant relief, like flipping a switch from dark to light. But recovery isn't like that. It's gradual, with setbacks and struggles. There were times I wondered if I would ever feel normal again. Marcus listened, giving her space to express what she needed to say. But standing here now, 5 years later, I realize I do feel free. Not because the memories are gone or because it doesn't hurt sometimes, but because I've learned that what happened to me doesn't control my life anymore. I control my life, and I choose to use it to help others. Emma smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that lit up her entire face. So thank you, Marcus. Not just for that day, but for everything since. For showing me that there are good people in the world who care about protecting children. For helping me see that my experience could be used for something positive. You did that yourself, Emma. I just paid attention when it mattered. Everything after that, all the healing and advocacy and lives saved, that's been you and these other amazing young women. As Marcus drove home that evening, he reflected on the journey of the past 5 years. The investigation into Pemberton's network had led to 73 arrests across multiple countries. Hundreds of children had been identified and provided with services. Laws had been changed to strengthen protections for vulnerable children. Training programs had been implemented worldwide. But beyond the statistics and systemic changes, there were individual lives that had been transformed. Emma, Lily, Sophie, and Charlotte had been given back their futures. Families had been reunited. Children who had been invisible in their suffering had been seen and saved. Marcus thought about the countless people who had been trained in the Emma protocol, who were now out in the world with heightened awareness and tools to act. Teachers noticing students in distress, store clerks paying attention to concerning interactions, neighbors looking out for children in their communities, medical professionals recognizing signs of abuse, all of them part of a growing network of people who refuse to look away. The next morning, Marcus received an email from a social worker in Australia. She had attended one of his training sessions 6 months earlier and wanted to share a story. She had been working with a family and noticed that one of the children exhibited several signs from the protocol. When she followed up, she discovered the child was being abused by a relative. Because she had recognized the signs and known how to intervene appropriately, the child was now safe and receiving treatment. "Your training saved this child's life," the social worker wrote. "I want you to know that the work you and Emma started is making a difference on the other side of the world. Thank you for teaching us to see what matters most." Marcus forwarded the email to Emma with a simple message. "This is your legacy. Children being saved because you were brave enough to ask for help and share your story." Emma's response came quickly. "Our legacy. We did this together, and we're going to keep doing it, saving as many kids as we can." Years would continue to pass. The 4 girls would build careers and lives. Some would have families of their own. Marcus would eventually retire from the Royal Guard, but would never stop training people in child protection. The Emma protocol would become such a standard part of training across multiple professions that eventually, people might not even remember its origin story, but the heart of it would remain unchanged. A frightened child finding the courage to ask for help in a creative way. An observant officer who paid attention and chose to act. A team that worked together to bring justice and safety, and survivors who transformed their pain into purpose, ensuring that other children would be seen, heard, and protected. In a world where darkness sometimes seemed overwhelming, where children continued to face dangers that should not exist, there were also lights. People who noticed, people who cared, people who acted, and that made all the difference. Emma had been invisible in her suffering until Marcus saw her. Now, because of what they had built together, thousands of children who might have remained invisible were being seen. Lives were being saved, hope was being restored, and it all started with one moment, one sign, one person who refused to look away. That was the true story, not just of a rescue, but of what happens when courage meets compassion, when trauma transforms into advocacy, when one person's choice to pay attention creates ripples that spread across the world. It was a story that continued to unfold every day, in every act of protection, every rescued child, every survivor who found their voice. And it all began with a simple message signed by frightened hands. "Help me. Not safe, please." A message that was seen, understood, answered,